What a difference 24 hours makes. What a difference 24 hours makes in the perception and the conversation around the West Virginia men's basketball team. I am Mike Asti and joined as always by Cody Nespor on this edition of Mountaineer Report here, made possible by WVU Sports Now, available on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, notification bell, wherever you get your content from YouTube, and also wherever you get your podcasts. We are available for in just audio form, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, etc. And the Mountaineers now coming off of, as we're speaking to you, a pretty rough loss to Arizona, a home loss to Arizona, and on the heels of getting nationally ranked in every major poll. Probably no longer going to be ranked in those polls. Arizona is going through a little bit of a disappointing year based on their preseason expectations. They do even things out after the Mountaineers already picked up a win over Arizona in the Bahamas around Thanksgiving, but now lose this game. Tucker DeVries did not play. We're going to talk about the prospects of when and if they're going to get him back on this show and how much they really need him, because he had a lot of three-pointers in that win over Arizona months ago. They didn't have him and then never really had a chance against Arizona just last night from this show. And we also are going to get into some comments that were made by Arizona's coach about Darian DeVries and that he's already over exceeding expectations and deserves an extension now. As soon as possible, they need to lock him up. So whether we think the program really needs to do that, and if he could potentially get poached, when that decision may go down, it's only year one, but universally he's doing a damn good job under the circumstances. And if Ren Baker is going to act as swiftly as maybe a past athletic director did for West Virginia. So, Cody, you were there on location covering the game. They did pick up a major victory over Kansas. They do have quality wins that we've been talking about on recent shows, over Gonzaga, over Arizona, the team they also lost to on Tuesday night. And it got them nationally ranked. They're getting exposure, and people obviously rolled their eyes that, of course, the second they get national recognition, then they lay an egg, and now they're going to lose all that national love. But watching the game, covering the game, seeing how it unfolded, did it feel like they were choking? Did it feel like maybe this is the real team that finally got exposed? Did you maybe watch it like I kind of watched it and thought, I'm almost more surprised they beat Kansas because this is an undermanned Mountaineer team, that maybe this is more of the reality of the situation when you don't have Tucker DeVries? How did you absorb it? Because they were really never in that game, and that's a bad loss for a team that just got ranked.
Yeah. I didn't think it was terrible. The way I was kind of thinking about it is, if you viewed it as just, if they would have had two conference games against Arizona, obviously the one in the Bahamas was, not pre-scheduled, and it's not a. But if they had that, and at the beginning of the season you said, oh, they're going to split with Arizona, you'd absolutely take that.
Sure.
So I didn't think it was that bad. All things considered, Arizona's record
Timing sucks.
The timing's bad. And Arizona record is all messed up, but that's still one of the most talented teams in the country, in my opinion. And they cut it to 5 with like 9 minutes left. Or even less time than that. They
I think 7 minutes or so. Yeah.
So it wasn't terrible. I don't think they got exposed. I think they're just the first team that kind of did what teams need to do to beat West Virginia. I mean that's. I mean, the formula for West Virginia's winning has been kind of out-toughing other teams, kind of, what they did against Kansas is slow the game way down, be really physical, be really deliberate. And Arizona's really the first team this year. Like, Pitt just went crazy and kicked their butts.
Pitt got their butt kicked on the same night West Virginia lost as well, granted number 4 Duke. But yeah, Pitt having that win over West Virginia does show that the worst of the Mountaineers, granted it was early in the season.
But Arizona really just kind of, the first team really just kind of manned up and said, you're not going to push us around. Your defense isn't going to bother us. And then on the flip side, we're going to bump you. We're going to get our hands in there. We're not going to let you take the shots you want. And especially really early on, West Virginia's offense took a bunch of terrible shots.
Yeah.
They got really sped up. Like, Arizona really sort of dictated the whole game. But I don't think it's like the sky is falling moment, or like this magical run is over, because I don't think teams. It's weird to say they just played Kansas and beat Kansas. I don't think teams that aren't as talented as Arizona are going to be able to do that. And Arizona's great size, and they've got some dudes that are muscular. So I do think they're not every team is built like that. And it's weird to say because West Virginia's not a juggernaut, right? It's
No.
they have good role players. They
Yeah.
they have one real superstar with Javon Sloan, but
Mostly a role-playing team, which I think is the issue kind of right now as they now trek through the Big 12, but
Yeah.
also why beating Kansas without Tucker DeVries and without Amani Hansberry in that win, even though he did play against Arizona. That Kansas win is the most surprising of all throughout their entire season, and that's what got them nationally ranked. That's why Andy Katz said they even should be within the top 20 because they're 10 spots back of Kansas, who they just beat. But then you watch Arizona, and as you're saying, the depth gets exposed. The fact that they can be really cold shooting gets exposed. The fact they don't have a superstar to rely on. Tucker DeVries kind of carried them through that Arizona win that you mentioned, the Bahamas, where he just shot the lights out. They don't have a player that can really do that. And we also talked about it on a past show that maybe Small is going to need 20, 25 points in victories, with the exception of just the rarity of the Kansas win to lead them through wins if they don't really have a true number two, if they don't certainly have a number three, and if Tucker's not there.
Yeah.
Small had 17 in the game. Nobody else was in double digits in scoring. Now, does that give you concern about Colorado, about the rest of the schedule? Certainly Iowa State coming up when they get back home on January 18th. If they don't get depth in scoring and Tucker does not return, could this season go off the rails? They got nationally ranked. Arizona's a good team. They're better than their record. The sky is not falling yet. But is there a concern? Where is your panic meter that they could go from a number 2 seed projection in the NCAA tournament from a major outlet where it looks like they're basically locked into getting in the NCAA. They do have quality wins on the resume. The Ken Palm has not moved that much, which we have on the site. But if they just pick up tons of losses here, they're going to go from number 2 projection to back in the NIT at best. Where are you panic meter that could happen if they don't get Tucker back?
Yeah. I think Colorado is going to be a really good game to kind of see. Obviously the travel is going to be a big component to that. It's on a Sunday in the middle of the day.
True.
Like how they respond at Colorado. Like if they just go out and they're as physical and as tough as they have been, and they just absolutely dictate everything against Colorado and come out with an easy win, then I say, hey, breathe easy. That's fine. If Colorado gives, because Colorado's not very good this year. If Colorado gives them trouble, if they're able to do what Arizona was able to do and speed them up and force them to take bad shots and keep them out of the paint, and out rebound them, by 7 or whatever it was. Actually more than that. Like if Colorado does that, then I'm like, okay, whoa, this isn't great. Because then you've got Houston and Iowa State, and those are obviously going to be tough games. But if they go out to Colorado and it's no drama, just kind of take care of business, then it's like, oh, okay, everything's fine. Arizona's a good team. No shame in losing to good teams. But then, like I said, you get Houston on the road and then Iowa State back here, back to back. Those are going to be huge games. You win one of those, like if you win one of those, your resume for the tournament is spectacular.
You're basically set. You'd have more quality wins than some of the number 1 seeds, and I'm not even joking around. I mean, you'd have so many quality wins that I think you could endure losses. But to your point, you have to have a victory over Colorado, a lowly Colorado, prior to that. If you drop the Colorado game, even if you beat Houston and Iowa State, assuming you're going to lose one of those and not win both, you really would be. Then I think you start fading in the analytic rankings. Then I think you'd start dropping in Ken Palm where they're not really moving right now. Then people would kind of scratch their head a little bit that if they're not going to get Tucker back, why would we even want to put this team in the tournament? Because there's still opinions involved in putting that team in there. And you probably would then need to win both Houston and Iowa State to cancel out a Colorado loss, where that's seemingly hard to imagine would occur. But I guess everything is up in the air because they did beat Kansas that nobody predicted. We did the hook on a map about the schedule, and we were like, well, that's a loss. Chalked it up as a loss, and then they go ahead and win that game. Speaking of Tucker DeVries, though, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now. Again, we are available here on YouTube if you're watching. Hit that notification bell, and also everywhere you get your podcasts. subscribe, download, do it all for us. Are you hearing anything else about Tucker's availability? It looked like he could barely move his leg, even trying to celebrate in the Arizona game. I continue to hear rumors that he's done for the year. I can tell you he's definitely hurt, and it's not 100% precautionary that some are asking all the time. He is hurt. I can't say the severity or if he's officially out for the year, but that is a rumor and that is a concern. I don't think, because the rumor exists, that he's trying to maybe red shirt and gain another year of eligibility and try the NBA again next year and have another year with his dad at WVU. That would be nice. But Cody, he's played a lot of games before the injury. I don't think he would get approved. I think they probably would get denied. We've seen them get denied in a lot of rulings with the NCAA in recent years, even though they eventually win maybe on appeal with the whole battle situation. But is that something you want to go down? Is that really worth it? And I think he may still lose. So where are you from what you maybe can say, what you're hearing, even just your thoughts on the Tucker DeVries situation and the necessity to have him if they're going to hope to have this be a special year that it looked like maybe it's materializing into, even though it's year one of Darian DeVries as head coach?
Yeah. I like you said, I don't think, red shirting and coming back next year. I don't think that's really realistic right now. I don't think that's sort of in the plans for anybody. Because even if he's out the whole year, which again, I don't think he is. Darren DeVries is very, very close to the chest.
Yeah, he's not saying, right.
We joked about it after the game. Somebody said, "Coach, I know you're not going to say anything, but we've got to ask you about KJ Tenor," and he was like, yeah, well, you know what I'm going to say." So, but I don't.
My favorite is when he said the update's the same, and then you're sitting there saying, "Well, what's the original update?" There was no original update, so unless you're confirming the rumors, what is the original update before you then can say it's the same? And you said that about a week ago about Tucker. Yeah,
but I don't think Tucker is like 100% like done for the year.
Okay.
And I also like the redshirt stuff. I don't think that's part of the plan. I don't really think that's realistic because even though he's hurt, he's still getting talked about for the NBA as like a second round guy, and
he was a projection second round by Bleacher Report. That's true.
And staying in college, getting another year older,
right?
I'm sure his dream is the NBA. Being another year older next year, even if he plays great, like the NBA draft is so finicky. They hate taking older guys in the draft. It's all
That's
about
true, I mean, he played 8 games so far. I do think again he wouldn't get approved even if he tried, and I also don't know if it's worth the fight. It'd be months of a journey, and I also do think that you never know with the NBA and what they're looking for. I mean, they'll take players that are from overseas. They'll take players that played a handful of games. They'll take players that don't have stats. Because they think they could fit into a role. There are players that do have stats end up with no type of career. And this is not even just the NBA. This is across pro sports. You never can fully gauge that. But 8 games played, averaging 14.9 points, 4.9 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 41.2 field goal shooting percentage wise. Not bad numbers, not incredibly great numbers that if you read those numbers, you would think, wow, the team's going to be an NCAA tournament team. You probably would think this is going to be an average year and it's year one and it's no big thing. But they were able to win without him having to dominate. And I think part of the redshirt conversation for some is because there's a belief maybe prior to seeing those second round projections that he didn't do enough to increase his value to get drafted, because we have seen Eric Stevenson and others get that cup of coffee in summer league and have it go nowhere. And you really got to get drafted before an NBA franchise cares enough about you to really send you on a course that gets you into the league. This isn't like the NFL or Major League Baseball. There's not an abundance of rounds. We're looking at those two. To get in those 2 rounds, and if you're, don't have a legacy, if you're not, say, a Bronny James and have your father, it's pretty difficult. So for him to even get those projections is a nice feather in his cap, but there's no guarantee he does get drafted. And I think that was the concern. Do you try for the red shirt where he then can come back and actually throw stats up? But I don't think it would even get approved if they tried, for me.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, if they were to get Tucker back this year, the biggest thing I think would just be depth wise. Like, you get Tucker back, you don't need Javon handling the ball for 37 minutes. You don't need Jonathan Powell playing 30 minutes. And Jonathan Powell's been incredible for a freshman. Like there's really no point where he's looked overwhelmed or overmatched. But certainly, he move him back to the bench. It'd be great because they played 7 guys last night. And I mean, you could tell. I mean, it happened against Oklahoma State too. Like they get to a point in the second half, the guys are tired, and the shots, even if they get good looks, the shots don't fall because
That's
they're
what makes the Kansas
exhausted.
win remarkable because they had
Well,
no rest, and they
and they
did
were
that. Yeah.
and they were so deliberate at Kansas.
Yeah.
And DeVries talked about it. He's like they were willing to run the shot clock the whole way down and just chuck something up instead of getting into a track meet with Kansas. And that's part Arizona, got out and played fast and got in transition because they know. I mean, other coaches know. Hey, he's got 7 guys. They can't run for 40 minutes. But that's what I think the biggest. Like, obviously, we know. Tucker's great on defense. He's a phenomenal shooter. But I think the biggest thing would just be, his ability to let Javon play off of the ball, and just his presence lengthening the bench by one more.
Yeah, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now. They definitely need Tucker back if they're really going to make a run in the NCAA tournament. They do have a resume that could argue for it as long as they don't drop these games they shouldn't drop, say to Colorado, for example. If they can hold water, even without Tucker, they might be able to crawl in. And they probably would accept an NIT bid this year just to be able to help build this team. It is year one with DeVries, even though obviously in recent years that we talked about in the offseason, historic programs like the caliber of West Virginia have been turning it down in recent memory, but I think they would be fine with going into anything, even in addition to the NCAA tournament, which they obviously would accept, just to kind of see this team play more. It would suck to only get 1 year of Tucker and have this be it because it's an injury-plagued year, but maybe he get a chance in the NBA anyway. But we will see for sure. But they definitely need depth. I definitely can tell you they need depth in order to win more of these Big 12 games and get a solid placement to be able to do anything, or this could go off the rails because they are exhausted. Jawan Small cannot be relied on to score 20 plus every game. When he doesn't, they don't seemingly have a chance, and is just about depth. I think Tucker would at least reset the depth because Hansberry looked like he wasn't even 100%, even though he played 21 minutes. They could be without him next game, and it wouldn't surprise me to have him and Tucker miss again, and then winning without both of them again, even against a worse team than who you beat in Kansas, seems hard to imagine. But what I do want to flip to, and it's kind of a story that's going viral right now, but it's not too often that you see a head coach spend time in his post-game press conference talk about the opposing coach. But Arizona's Tommy Lloyd decided to sing the praises of the coach he just beat and to say that West Virginia, another school in his conference, should lock up a very good coach in Darian DeVries and keep making it difficult for Arizona for years to come. And the jokes that no, he just wants to keep on beating WVU is not the reality, because he knows Darian DeVries is a good coach, and he also did lose to the Mountaineers this year, despite coming off the win when he did say what he said. And I'll give you the quote here. So Darren's doing such a good job. He's done an amazing job in his first year. I know they've had some crazy injuries, which we've just talked about. Tucker DeVries, the best player in particular, and I'm just adding that in. And he's dealt with it. To be honest with you, their start has been pretty magical. You beat Arizona, you beat Gonzaga, Kansas. Are you kidding me? And then obviously goes on to say, if I were that guy's agent, I would have 2 more years on that contract right now. And adding that he wants them to extend. Aaron DeVries believes they should. They got off to an amazing start to fully end what he said. So, Cody, number one, were you at all surprised to be hearing this from him after the game? Do you think they should extend Aaron DeVries now? And if not, or even if you do, what do you think the realistic timeline is for Ren Baker to even consider something like that? More likely evaluating after the season. We did talk about off the air, Shane Lyons extending Neil Brown very early in his tenure, and some could argue that kind of ruined it and made it go 6 years when they weren't really climbing to where the program should, and it was a roller coaster ride because he was worried about Brown being poached. When you have 1 year like Darian DeVries is having, if they would get in the NCAA tournament with these quality wins, especially with Tucker hurt in a tough conference, maybe another program would try to poach him. Do you do it to avoid that happening?
Yeah, I was surprised to hear Tommy Lloyd say that. I mean, just to bring up the other coach's contract.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. I really enjoyed talking to Tommy Lloyd. He was a really fun interview.
Seems
I
like
could
it.
tell he's a guy. He just says whatever. Like
Yeah.
he's not worried about feelings or perceptions or whatever.
No.
I
Are
mean,
you
he
kidding me?
just I mean whatever he thinks he just said. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed him. And I think it's so funny that this sort of like narrative cycle for the fan base, it comes from an opposing coach. But I actually think it's a pretty interesting thing to think about right now.
Yeah.
Like it's a great question. Should WVU extend Darian DeVries today? And it's like
Today, January 8th, as we're recording this show.
it's like
Yes.
if you look at this season, everything has gone as not even as well, better than you could have ever imagined. I mean, to
Yeah.
win at Kansas, for his son to be hurt for most of the year at this point, it's hard to point at anything and have concern over it and say, well, we would extend him, but I'm worried about that or I'm worried about this. And it's like even his
Especially
recruiting,
especially
the,
the cluster of the last couple years and
yeah,
instability there and going from the Huggins scandal and even kind of it dipping a little bit under Huggins those last few years. And
yeah,
then the chaos of recruiting, re-recruiting again with the portal players. And then Josh Eilert, arguably the worst season in program history. And a lot of things he had to deal with, but it didn't go well. Darian DeVries is dealing with some adversity and it's
yes,
going very well. I think to your
yeah,
point, it's not like they're just dominating and everyone's on the court and everyone's singing country roads every night. His best player, who's an NBA prospect, is out with injury. He lost Hansberry in a game that they won. He has a big one over Gonzaga that they were close in recent years with Huggins, but didn't beat. He's doing things that they weren't doing even at the end of Huggins, winning at Kansas, not at home like they were able to do, but at Kansas. So there's already his history. He actually has the hottest start for WVU head coach in like 60 plus years. And that includes years where there was a lot of success in the midst there with Khaled, with Huggins. It's not like it's all been bad and he has the hottest start. So that's why it's being talked about now. But it is being generated from the opposing coach.
yeah. And I think it's like I if you sat down and said what could you want him to have done better so far this year, I don't think there is anything. Like you
Okay.
could say, oh, better performance against Pitt. That was the second game of the
That's the
year
one, though.
with
The third game. Yeah.
the third game, yeah. With a brand new roster, and it's like that's the one maybe. But then
if they had that win, Cody, you would have a trump card in your argument with the rival fan base that they don't have now because they've had a better year, but they got killed to Pitt. I think even if you at least were close, and I think that would solidify getting in the NCAA tournament, even if you would lose to Colorado, because they would say, okay, you have another quality win. You do have the rival win, but with Pitt fading out and not getting ranked, that looks really bad. That's their loss that they can't make up for. That's the only thing, though. That is the blemish, and it was early in the
it's
10.
like the high school recruiting class for next year is
Good,
unbelievably good. I mean,
yeah,
and it's like I don't you couldn't have asked for a better first 2.5 months, 3 months now.
Right. We're very early though. Yes.
So it's like here today. I don't think there's any reason why to be against an extension other than just to say, well, does he need it? He's got a 5-year deal.
Right. That's another thing. It's not like he's a lame duck coach. That's why it's weird to hear an opposing coach say that. And another thing that pops in my mind is when coaches talk, do you think is DeVries and him or DeVries and him texting quietly and he's trying to help his friend? Like that just is odd timing to me.
Oh, and it's and you kind of mentioned it. Like I with what happened with Neil Brown.
Yeah.
He gets the extension after that 2020 year that really wasn't even that good.
No, they won the Liberty Bowl, but they had a game off. They didn't play Oklahoma because of COVID.
Yeah.
They played Army. They didn't play Tennessee, which was supposed to be the matchup. They got too excited off of a weird COVID year. Yeah.
But then the reason they did it was Shane Lyons was so afraid South Carolina was going to hire Neil away.
Yeah.
And I think, that was very much a bet on the future that Neil was going to get better and the program was going to keep going. I think DeVries has done enough. And it's I don't like saying it because I hate to jump the gun, and I'm not usually a big like hot take guy, Mike.
I know you're not, no.
But I do think like if I'm Ren Baker and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, hey, attacking on 2 extra years, bumping his buyout way up so he doesn't get poached, giving him a bunch of guaranteed money. that's not that bad for me and the old Mountaineers.
You
Right? Like
brought up off the air though about, and this would be less of a hot take, of giving him an increased buyout, which is similar to kind of what happened with Brown, which again did hurt the program later on because once they decided they didn't really want to keep him, it did have to elongate, and they had conversations and fans wanted him gone for 2 years. You got a billboard because that buyout was 2022. That buyout basically kept him, and then you had 2023. But he would have probably been fired 2 years earlier if it wasn't for the Lions extension. You brought up that maybe you give him you give DeVries an increased buyout, but not necessarily more years. How a 7-year deal or 6 years after the end of this season? That's a long time for any coach in college sports today. It's hard to believe that DeVries even knows in his mind he wants locked in for almost a decade in West Virginia. If he's winning Big 12 titles, Cody, and going to Final Fours in 6-7 years at WVU, he's going to be vying for the Kentucky job, and I'm not even joking. So does he want that type of thing, or does years not even matter in today's contract that he'll be like, okay, throw 7, 8 more, 9 more years on there. We don't care if we got to part ways. All we care about is this buyout. He's worried about the buyout. But is that maybe what you do? More of a Neil Brown thing. You worry about the buyout, and it's not so much the years, because even Brown's second contract, there were years added on, but they reduced the buyout, which is how they're able to then have an easier time firing him now. It was all about the buyout with Brown.
Yeah.
Do you maybe look at the buyout with DeVries and make it harder for him to move if he does want another job that's at least a similar program, because those jobs are going to be open and he's going to be a darling coach. And if they make an NCAA tournament run, he's a national coach of the year candidate.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit it right. You kind of mentioned that Kentucky job. There's so many of the blue blood, like upper echelon programs that have lost their coach in the last 3-4 years. I mean, Miami lost their coach a couple weeks ago.
I don't know if Miami's a blue blood, but I get what you're saying.
But you know, but like, you know, what if the UConn job comes open? What if the Gonzaga job comes open?
Right? How do you say no, even though you like West Virginia? Yeah.
So that's where, like, if I'm Ren, that's where I'm like, you know, I think I've hit not even I think, like, I have hit a home run here. Let's lock it up. Let's say if worst comes to worst and he does get poached, let's at least get a whole bunch of money for it.
Right.
And that's where I think,
because it could be that if you're DeVries and Gonzaga calls you and Few wants to retire, or if Kentucky calls you because this Pope experience isn't going well and the fans are already out on him despite him being a former player. If those jobs call, you might tell Ren, I love it here. I know this buyout's wild. I don't care. I got it. That's a premier job. I got to go get that job. So, but you would at least safeguard you as a program if you're Baker, that, okay, we understand that, we're not mad at you, but we're raking in some cash by them because they're going to have to pay it or we're going to fight it. And maybe that's your other recourse. Yeah.
And that's where, like, Kentucky, Gonzaga, Duke, money's not an object for them. Like, they would pay a coach's buyout to hire a coach. But that, and then, you know, you add the years. You say, well, how do you make it worth it for Darren? You know, to want to lock in. You add the years on the end. You add guaranteed money. You maybe give him a raise.
Increase incentives. I mean, there's incentives now, but you make it even higher. If you go to Final Four, you get even more money than you would have got on the previous deal. You increase the incentives, maybe Big 12 title, etc.
And the only risk there from WVU's standpoint would be if this is a flash in the pan, and
that's the other point. Do you not even? Like, I mean, we're talking before the Colorado game. Do you not even? What if he loses that, and then you're already on board with the extension? Like, what if you call him now and say, "I will do an extension with you," but then you drop Colorado, then you drop Houston, then you get embarrassed to Iowa State. I know he has Tucker out, and it's nothing against him. He's doing a great job this year. But then are you sitting back and saying, well, I kind of promised him we were going to do an extension, but now this year's not going as well, and I don't know if I want to lock in as much. And then you're kind of screwed into handling with DeVries and his people. I just think that if you're Ren Baker, knowing him well enough as we do, he would rather wait and have the conversation, even the day one convo, after the year. I don't think he loves that. He probably doesn't like that Tommy Lloyd did this, because now it's all over social where he is, and he's posting videos about shoveling his driveway and using a snowblower. But I'm sure in the back of his mind when he's posting it, thinking, I'm going to throw this diversion out there to have the conversation die out about giving an extension to a coach that is doing a freaking fantastic job. But he has only been there 2.5 months into the season.
And that's where like you don't do it today, right? Like I absolutely think you wait till the end of the season. Like this is
Right.
a move. Like maybe you touch base with Darren's agent and you're like, hey, like what are you guys thinking? Like what is and you just kind of feel it out, and then like
Yeah.
end of the year, announce it. Like if that's if assuming the year continues to go fine. Like even if the year just kind of goes plateaus, like they've had a great year. Um, so that's like, do you do it today, January 8th? No, obviously not. It's only been what
Right.
14 games. Um,
Right.
but like start kind of kicking the tires with his agent, and then but it's like I don't want to bring up Kurt Signetti because no coach really has ever done that kind of turnaround. But like
Well,
they
that's the one
locked
that
him up.
everyone brings up, football or
Yeah,
basketball, because the 1 year
but
turnaround, and he did have a benefit of the schedule, but
yeah,
100%,
but
yes.
they like they didn't waste any time. They locked him up before the playoff. They said, "This is our guy. We're not gonna." And
Right.
obviously,
They
WVU basketball is not the destitute program that Indiana football had been.
That's what I
um,
mean. Like Indiana
but
had won literally, they had
yeah,
3 bowl wins in 120 some years of playing football. That's a basketball school still. They experienced the best season they've arguably ever had in their
yeah,
entire history of a century plus. And yes, they locked him up even before then getting blown out in a playoff game, but they at least did the regular season, and it was an historic year. If West Virginia goes through this year and makes an NCAA tournament, even though that'd be a great job for Darian DeVries, it is not even in the top 5 best
yeah, yeah,
seasons in WVU basketball history. Certainly not even in recent memory, even as bad as last year was.
yeah.
There have been some great years in recent memory. So, yeah, it's a little different situation, even though some would argue that. The only concern and the only similar part of it is that Indiana certainly did that by saying, this is the best we've ever been. He's going to be attractive and he's going to get poached if we don't do this now and really lock up the years and make him retire here. Maybe the Mountaineers are thinking that DeVries is going to be very attractive. And if we don't do something to this deal, even though it is year one and we would rather wait longer and wait and see, we don't have the luxury because he's going to be attractive in that offseason cycle and someone's going to try to poach him.
Yeah.
And maybe a lateral move, he would say no. But if it's a top dog, he would have to go. And you just never know. I mean, maybe you do a coaching swap with Michigan because they don't love Dusty May that much, and that was the original coach everyone wanted for the Mountaineers and Wren. But
But
maybe you're forced into it because of the situation to avoid him getting poached.
yeah, and I think the other thing an extension could do is, like you just said, it could eliminate the possibility for any sort of lateral move. Um,
At least a lateral move, yeah.
like I don't- like
Right.
I don't know Darren well enough to be like, oh, maybe he would want to go, to a Big Ten school that's about on the same level, or you know. But I do
Right.
think if you do lock him up, it does kind of take that away. And it does say, hey, if you're going to go to one of the blue bloods, like we just live with that. And the other thing I
Yeah.
was just kind of thinking about, Mike, is if we're looking at basketball, like Mark Kellogg's probably going to be doing extension here after this year
Oh,
or after
yeah. I
next
mean,
year.
it's not being talked
So
about, but I would imagine he's going to get an extension. I'd imagine in the women's basketball coaching world, he'd be a very attractive candidate that could get poached as well. Certainly, if they have another NCAA tournament appearance and run,
yeah,
and obviously they're looking like that's happening, and they're a ranked team. So yeah,
so that
you'd love to be able to evaluate these guys longer, but you have to kind of play defense against at least
yes,
lateral moves. And Kellogg, we have seen the difference in the men's and women's game too. The women's game is more apt. We've seen that with Kim Caldwell getting hired by Tennessee from Marshall.
yep,
They are more apt, even though Ren said she wasn't ready at the time for WVU when she was at a lower level, but they are more apt to elevate a coach
hmm
from a mid-major, a group of 5 for a football term, or from even a lower level to a big major blue blood job. I mean, Kim Caldwell
that's
got one
true.
of arguably the top 2 jobs in all
Yes,
women's basketball
yeah,
from Marshall after only being at Marshall for a brief time. So Mark Kellogg at West Virginia in a couple NCAA tournament appearances, they may think, well, hell, that's even better than when Kim Caldwell was at Marshall. So
yeah,
he's ready to go. And if
yeah,
somehow the Notre Dame job or the Stanford job or any of those jobs or South Carolina's coach wants to retire, they may say, well, Mark Kellogg's the next guy in line for a blue blood job. That might be where you're at with him. With
yeah,
DeVries, I think in all reality, you're not yet at worrying about blue bloods. I think they would even, like, if you're seeing Hurley go somewhere in the NBA lures him, UConn's going to have to they might even try to pluck an NBA coach. Like they're going to really have to go for a star. I don't think you're yet worried about blue bloods, but as what you're saying, you still could be concerned about lateral moves. And the one advantage that Ren would have with a basketball coach versus, say, football with the Big 12, you could tell the guy, okay, like in football, we talked about Hudson Clement. In Illinois is a similar, maybe even a worse program historically, but it's Big 10. So maybe there's more money there. He did get more money. Maybe that's part of it. Certainly a coach could be thinking, okay, it's like, it's more money. So maybe I'd rather be in that conference. Coaches could definitely think that around the country. But in the Big 12 in basketball, you sit down with DeVries and say, okay, yeah, I mean, this mediocre program in the Big 10, you're in a better conference now.
Yeah.
Like you're in the premier conference now. So why go to a worse program that's in the Big 10? You don't have to worry about a conference jump as much as maybe you would in football, even if it's a worse program, because they want to be in that Big 10 or the SEC, obviously. So maybe you safeguard yourself there. But there is the negative, and what fans are going to bring up is, and they even were bringing it up on the comments on the article you put out there on WVSN, that the worst case scenario is the Neil Brown example, that you're worried about him getting poached. You give him a higher buyout, don't even care about years, but a higher buyout. The buyout ends up being too high that you can't afford it. When you want to fire him, that's only a couple years later, and you don't have more success that you're banking on getting because he's a young coach, but you don't have this climb that the Neil Brown promised. If you make a tournament this year, you give him the higher buyout, and then next year you miss the NCAA tournament because you're going to have to rebuild the roster likely without Tucker. Are you going to be sitting there saying, we believe he's a great coach, but now we're dealing with this angst again, and now we're a little bit upset that we have an unmanageable buyout financially? I don't think he wants to get into – Ren's a great money guy. I don't think he will get into – even if he gives an extension and more of a buyout to keep him, I don't think he's going to make the same mistake that Shane Lyons made and give a buyout that is unmanageable financially. I think Shane did not account for money as much as Ren will. I think Ren will go to Darren and say, we love you. Here's the number. We will give you an increased buyout to avoid a lateral move. If this does not work for you, Ren might be thinking in the back of his mind, hell, he wants to leave anyway. He's not locked in here for the future anyway. I'm not going to screw the program to just give him the Brinks truck, knowing he's in his mind waiting for the UConn or Kentucky job. Because that would be what it would tell me. If you don't want to do an increased buyout now and you want a buyout of $20 million or something crazy, you just really don't know. This is a stepping stone. This is not your destination job. If you can do a reasonable buyout, then we'll do it now.
Yeah. And that's, the other thing when I'm thinking about DeVries is, like, he had some real questions when they hired him.
Right?
Yeah, from
100%.
Drake. Like, big questions, like, is he being carried by his son? They've never had a tournament run. As good as his teams had been at Drake, they never had a tournament run. They never had those, like, big, like, wow, ESPN alert upsets. And it's like, you look at the start to this season. Tucker's out. Nothing's changed. They beat Kansas at Kansas. They beat Gonzaga. Like, the only thing that's missing still is a tournament run, and it's hard to look at this team and say, like, that they would make the tournament and just fizzle out, because of who they've beaten and how they've played. So it's like,
depends on seed line. I mean, if they're a 10 seed because they lose some conference games, but I mean that's what fans would think, that if they are one and done, that would. But it's year one too. If they're one and done the NCAA tournament, you could argue that's higher than the reasonable expectations that Ren probably had for year one.
Yeah, and it's so that's. And you've done a great job kind of outlining, like, the risks of a preemptive contract extension.
I'm going to be the negative. I'm going to be the bearer of bad news for the show here. Cody's giving you, this is why you should do it, and Mike's like, well, here's all the negative that'll make you unhappy and possibly provide that dark cloud over the program. Someone had to do it, I guess. Yeah.
I just think the flip is, as we sit here today, and obviously the vast majority of the Big 12 schedule has not been played. As we sit here today, the nightmare scenario for WVU would be to lose this guy after a year or two. right? Right? Like
Certainly after 1 year, certainly if you have
but
a good year and then he leaves in the summer on his own, especially if it's a lateral move, that would look really bad perception-wise. It would put you in a whole nother mess with the damn
yes,
portal and trying to hire a coach again. Ren publicly said to us, to our face, whether it be in the public presser or even in one-on-ones, he does not want to go through this every year. He
yeah,
does not. You just would guess he wouldn't, but he said it. With DeVries, I do not want to do this every year. He wanted a young coach that he could build with. It's maybe a little different than football, where he's going into a win now pressure cooker, bringing Rich Rod
yeah,
back. Even Rich Rod's contract, they have a clause in there 2-3 years in. They're just going to meet and discuss the future. Whereas the other contracts were immediately triggered an extension, meaning if Rich Rod loses, they could fire him. They're not going to let this be a 6-year journey like Neil
mhm,
Brown. But it does sound like Ren, from what he said after hiring DeVries, he's comfortable with this being a build for years, and he would have been comfortable with this being a bad year, and he wants to build a journey, and maybe he would let DeVries build up this program as he's a young coach and maybe get to a conference title scenario 2-3 years in. He didn't care if it happened in year one. If great if
yeah,
it does, but
yeah,
he was willing to do a climb, per se. People
yeah,
don't want to hear that term, but a climb with Darian DeVries, whereas he wouldn't do that with football and has more of a sense of urgency. So if you lose DeVries year one, obviously it's against what he wants. Obviously it's a poaching. Obviously that's bad. If it's not a blue blood, it looks bad. And then I don't know how the hell you build a roster with the way the portal is.
mhm,
You're looking at probably having a bad year next year because you're messing with all of this at the end of the spring or summer. And we know how the fan base is. After what just happened with Huggins and Eilert, they're not going to deal with having a bad year next year because you lose your coach. That is
yeah,
going to make them all say, Ren, you told me that we're a top 20 program. We're a top 20 current and all-time program. And if we're losing our coach year one when you didn't want to lose him, then maybe what you're saying is fool's gold. And in this era, we can't compete. That is what people are going to say again. And I
yeah,
don't think he'd have really a response that can quiet that if they lose a coach in year one. So it
yeah,
depends on how much you think you're going to lose him and how much
yeah,
he's locked in. Depending on how this year goes, with how much he's overachieving so far,
yeah,
on if you give an extension or what it looks like.
yeah. And think about how important this hire has been. Bob Huggins is your everything, face of the program, everything. You
Right.
have a terrible, terrible public, messy, messy, messy breakup with him. The interim coach has, like you said, the worst year in program history. Um, and
Worst or
on the
second
flip
to
side,
worst. Yeah.
and on the
Yeah.
flip side, your football program's a mess. You have to fire
Yeah.
him. There's no
Yeah.
so your men's program and your football program. I'm a year early for football when they hired DeVries, but um,
Right.
you
One
know,
of these got to be good soon.
yeah,
100%. One
and
of these got to
so
be good soon.
right, so the men's program is as low as it's been maybe ever, and you bring this guy in and he's fixed it in
Since the
the
end of
first two
Catlin.
months
Yeah.
of the year, and he's got everybody back, and the arena is sold out, and everybody's excited.
Yeah.
I just think the worst case scenario is if Don Plitzweit happens again, where you brought her in. She replaced Mike
That
Carey.
worked out, though. He got Kellogg, but yes, 100%.
So
Yeah.
Mike Carey he's the face of women's basketball. He's got a
Good
great run.
example.
Obviously, not a messy breakup. He just retires. But you go out, you get the next coach, and this wasn't
If you
Ren,
ask him, it was messy. He said he got forced out, but
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 it
yeah,
wasn't publicly messy.
it
I
wasn't
guess.
publicly messy until he went on TV and aired the
Yeah.
grievances.
Um, but you get right. You get your next
Yeah,
coach. She's younger. She takes you to the tournament year one. You think everything's
yeah,
great. She leaves, and all of a sudden you're
100%.
like, "Damn,
And
what do
she
we do?"
leaves in mess. It was messier with
And
her.
she leaves a mess.
It's
Yes.
mess. Yeah, right. And then you get
So,
Kellogg, and it's a home run hire,
but
but you
right,
can't rely on doing that every time.
exactly. And so like you hit a home run with Mark Kellogg. You hit a grand slam with DeVries so far, right?
Yeah,
Like I just don't think if you're an athletic director. And right now, the football program, there's a lot of excitement, and they're selling a lot of season tickets.
sure.
But you don't know, right?
You don't
You
know,
you
right?
don't
You don't
know,
know. You
and
don't know.
so that's why I think the
Could go
worst case
poorly.
scenario, the absolute dead last thing in the world you want to do as an athletic director is have to make another men's basketball hire, and that's why
No,
that's
you don't want 3 in 3 years.
yeah.
100%.
And
No,
so I just
no,
think
no
like
way.
everything's good right now. Like we don't want to lose Kellogg, we don't want to lose DeVries. And
Yeah.
plus, also, if we go, maybe further down the road, the baseball team's been very popular, been exploded, very successful. you're replacing that coach too, and you don't know about that.
Yeah, you
So
don't
it's
know
like,
about you inherited him. You were forced kind of, and you agreed to do it, but to ascend him rather than go actually search for somebody. He's not going to leave, but you're not probably fully sold on him until you see how the team plays.
so
So that's all true. I mean, this all trickles down, and it's all in Ren Baker's mind. He's in charge of all of this. But the men's basketball and the football programs are the two most important.
yes,
They're the straw that stirs the drink. Certainly at WVU, there's history at both of them. Football is still an unknown despite all the excitement, and it's number one. That's more important than men's basketball. But if football is an unknown, you got basketball success right now on the men's and women's side. You got to lock that in at minimum because the football's still an unknown for another 6-7 months. So that is absolutely the case. And as we talked about at the top of the show, as we kind of round things out, you might not be able to help if Kentucky or UConn calls. If UConn loses their coach of the NBA and they call and say, we're going to, we want DeVries because he's the national coach of the year somehow, then you can't handle it. Like, that's just the case. But you want to safeguard yourself in the buyout. And then it does suck if you're doing 3 coaching searches in 3 years, but at least you'll have more money to play with. And it won't look as bad if you're losing him to a blue blood, because then you can sell to the next guy. You have success here, and hell, like you're thought of as one of the best coaches in the country. They're talking about you on ESPN, and Stephen A is going to rant about how good or bad your hire is, where you wouldn't even know who he is 2 years earlier. But if you lose him to a lateral move and you don't tinker the buyout, and the buyout is easily just paid, and you don't gain as much as you could, then that's going to look bad. I'm sure this is more of an off-season thing. It was very rare. It's very rare and very odd that an opposing coach kind of started all this. Because he was not talked about by fans or media prior to the comments here by Tommy Lloyd, and the fans are running amok with that now. But you might have your hand forced. I'm sure Ren's not dumb enough that he probably thought about this before Tommy Lloyd said it, but I don't know if he loved Tommy Lloyd bringing it up, because now this is more of a fan conversation than it would have been before. But for this year, you also need to really know what you're getting in Tucker DeVries. You need to have some of these games coming up be victories. Certainly the next one coming up, which is the easiest one in a while. You do need to have this year end on a positive note, even if you overrated yourself and maybe overachieved in the first half of the season. If you go ahead and lose all these bad KenPom games, you get blown out to the ranked teams, you get embarrassed at home to Iowa State, who is a really good team, then not to say it ruins this being a quality year and the wins earlier in the year. You have to look at the overall body of work, but it does take the value away. It does show that maybe he's human. He's not just this superhero of a coach that can just beat everybody no matter who's on the floor. We are maybe seeing some humanality of Darian DeVries in the Arizona game, that, it doesn't matter who's out there. You got to have your horses. So we will see too. And part of this could be also about Tucker. If they are in any, and I don't believe they are, but if they are trying in the back of their mind for a medical red shirt and they're going to not play him and they want another year of Tucker that they're going to argue for, then that would be hard to do that at a third school for Tucker DeVries, a whole new dynamic. They probably would want to stay. So it depends on what the reality is there too. But this is all part of bargaining that Ren Baker will be getting into with Darian DeVries when he evaluates the year. And so far, it looks like you're going to get a pretty positive evaluation, unless this totally goes off the rails.
Yeah.
But they got a must win in that next one against Colorado. I think we definitely can say that. You got to win that game. Even without Tucker DeVries, you should be able to win that game. If you can beat Kansas without Tucker, you should be able to beat Colorado without Tucker. And that'll make the other ones not must wins after that. But if you lose that game, it definitely will take the vibe away from that Kansas win and really put yourself behind the 8 ball for the rest of conference play, because there's still another couple months of this thing before the committee gets together. Cody Nespor here, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report. Again, hit the notification bell on YouTube and also subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Google Play, TuneIn, etc. Maybe we'll have more of these, maybe talk about the football program again on the next show, but we did deal with a lot of football the last couple shows, and I think we're close to having most of the announcements over with. I think we're close to the end of the announcements. They obviously could sign some of these players that have committed in terms of the players, but I think mostly we have the coaching staff in place. So maybe we'll get to that on a future show. But yeah, this Darian DeVries conversation, we're having it now because of what Tommy Lloyd said. no matter how this season ends, Cody, this is going to probably be the whole summer conversation.
Yeah.
And I think Ren Baker needs to feel comfortable in the back of his mind. Hopefully he can have a relaxing summer that's been very busy in recent years. If he's sitting on a beach, stressed out with anyone who texts Darian DeVries that they could poach him at any moment, that generates a 30-day portal window. Doesn't matter when the damn thing happens. It can ruin a year right away. So maybe you need to make sure that doesn't occur. And if they're going to get more NIL money, they're going to have rev share, and they're going to have more money, just funding in general, which he has said publicly they should be better off financially, then you got to make sure your house is in order. And clearly, Rich Rod's okay with taking less than Brown if more goes to the staff. Rich Rod's not going to be in any position to be asking for any extension, even if he has a solid, first week or two of the regular season. Beating RMU and Ohio's not giving him an extension. So you got another 8 months where nobody's worrying about extensions except for Kellogg and DeVries. So those got to be the priorities right now. We'll see what actually happens, though. If I had to guess, I think DeVries is going to get an extension. I think there will be some type of extension. I do think it'll be focused in on the buyout, but I don't think it'll be astronomical that it'll put him out of the blue blood conversation. I think he'll just stop the lateral move, probably, which I think is more the reality of the situation right now, and it will keep the program afloat as well. So again, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report here on WV Sports Now.